Hi guys, BuildZoid here, and today I'm going to be talking about memory chips and memory PCBs, and basically going to be adding some background information to a lot of the memory overclocking videos I make, and will continue to make, so that they make more sense to people who just don't know that much about memory, which will hopefully, well, it'll explain a lot of my sort of interests in memory, and also explain like why doesn't BuildZoid review any 3200 CL16 memory kits except for like I've considered the crucial ones, but like all the other 3200 CL16 is just like, no, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole, and there's a reason for that, and we're going to get to it. Anyway, so yeah, we're going to be talking about memory chips, memory PCBs, and the memory chips are by far the most important part of a memory stick because that's where all of the, that's where the data gets actually stored. And so the memory chips are the, black rectangles that you can see on, except this stick. This one has stickers on top of the memory chips to make them white. They're still black. It's just Guile decided that they're not aesthetically pleasing enough if they're black on a white PCB, so they put stickers on them. So those are white, but otherwise, memory chips, literally just the black rectangles. There's a few different sizes of the rectangles that depend basically on the size of the actual die inside the chip. So there's a little bit of silicon inside there, and that's actually for a lot of memory, those chips can be very small. The black rectangle can be disproportionately large relative to the actual chip inside, because the packaging size is heavily dependent on just how many BGA connections you have to have. So yeah, anyway, so that's part of that, but that doesn't really matter. Who really cares what size the memory chips are, right? It's not like you're going to be building laptops anytime soon, or at least if you make laptops, then I don't know why you're on this channel, because I couldn't care less about laptops. Anyway, where was I going with this? Yeah, so black rectangles, that's the memory chips. Now, the memory chips, they're only made by a couple companies. So like Corsair, G.skill, Team Group, Patriot, Kingston, HyperX, right? Guile. None of these companies make memory chips. Crucial is kind of special, but they technically also, Crucial technically doesn't make memory chips either. But anyway, so all of these companies that you frequently buy your memory from, especially like Corsair and G.skill and Kingston, which are some of the biggest memory vendors out there, yeah, they don't make memory chips. Memory chips are made by Samsung for DDR4 specifically, because DDR3 there's a few more manufacturers, but for DDR4 you've got Samsung, SK Hynix, Micron, Nanya as of relatively recently, and then there's some Chinese company, and there might be more manufacturers than that that I'm not aware of, but the big four would be, well, Nanya kind of doesn't belong in the big four. It's more like big three, and then there's everybody else, and even within the big three, it's kind of like Samsung and everybody else. So yeah, you've got Samsung, SK Hynix, Micron, and Nanya. Those are the ones that you'll frequently encounter relatively easily, in my opinion. Just because, I know that, for example, Corsair has started using Nanya memory chips and that kind of thing. So it's you can get Nanya quite easily. Once you start looking at the companies even smaller than that, it's just I have no, you'd probably have to buy sticks directly from them. Anyway, so, Samsung, SK Hynix, all of these guys, these are the actual, memory manufacturers. They make the memory chips that all of the memory vendors use to assemble their memory sticks. And now at this point, you might be like, so why would I buy my memory sticks from G.skill if I could just buy them from Samsung, or I could just buy them from Micron, or I could just buy them from SK Hynix instead of Team Group, Corsair? You get the idea. The issue is, so memory chips, the best way you can kind of think of them is kind of like CPU SKUs. So if we're talking about, say, Samsung 8 gigabit B die, that is a physically different piece of silicon from a 8 gigabyte, an 8 gigabit Samsung D die, which we have represented here on the desk. This is a D die, these are D die memory chips. These are B die. This uses B die from Samsung. This uses B die from Samsung. This also uses B die from Samsung. So that is literally a different manufacturing line, essentially. For each, for D die from the B die memory chip. So they're completely different. They do have the same capacity, but the manufacturing process is very different, which translates into completely different overclocking behavior, and also different silicon lottery behavior, which is the other thing that you have to keep in mind. The memory chips, like basically all semiconductors, are subject to the silicon lottery. This is B die, this is B die, this is also B die, that is B die. This is terrible. This memory stick here is some of the worst DDR4 I own. These 3 sticks are some of the best DDR4 I own. This one is terrible because this is a binning reject. So this is the very bottom of what Samsung manages to manufacture on the B die production line. And, you know, in a lot of ways, this is like it's still B die. It came off of the same production line, and it wasn't quite bad enough to throw away into the dumpster as not like defective, but it was bad enough that it's just like, yeah, it's terrible. It's some of the worst memory I own. Yeah, so that's like a binning reject, whereas this is like a top bin. This is the strongest memory in my collection. I'd put this as second, except the PCB is kind of weird on these. So it leads to some fun. We'll get to that, but this one leads to some fun like behaviors with certain motherboards. And then this would be, yeah, like it'd be like first, second, third, and then this would be just the bottom of my collection. Like this is so bad that I'm gonna get rid of it very soon. Like I'm trying to get this video out so that I can get rid of this and never have to think about owning that memory again. It's just like, it's gotta go. It's terrible. It's a waste of space in my drawers. Anyway, yeah, so the memory chips are subject to the silicon lottery, and they are literally different production production processes for each memory chip. So, you know, with Samsung, you have for their 8 gigabit chip size, so you have the chip density, right? And that'll be like 8 gigabit, 4 gigabit, which basically means like a 4 gigabit memory chip is like 512 megabytes. Why are memory chips like talked about in gigabits? I have no idea. It doesn't really make a lot. Like, they could just say the sizes in bytes, but yeah, they're referred to in gigabits, well, in bits. Yeah, so, you know, from Samsung, you have like 4 gigabit, and for 4 gigabit, they had die revisions like D die, E die. I think there was like an S die at some point. I'm not aware if there was like an A die or something. It's really hard to go, like, the thing is, the manufacturers will actually get rid of memory chips that they haven't been manufactured. Like, they'll delete them from their website if they haven't manufactured them for long enough. So it's just like, it's really hard for me to know what was the very first 4 gigabit memory chip that Samsung sold for DDR4, because it's just like, you can't look at that information up on Samsung's website anymore. Yeah, so for 4 gigabit, they had a couple different production revisions, you can essentially consider them, right? And as, like, different manufacturing processes, different dies. And then for 8 gigabit, you've got, and this is the thing, is like, you have to refer to the density of the memory chip, because if you say, I have Samsung 4 gigabit D die, that is a very different chip from 8 gigabit D die. This has nothing in common with a 4 gigabit D die memory chip. 4 gigabit D die is a very early DDR4 IC. It doesn't clock very high. It does relatively okay timings. It's not particularly like, and it's old. It's low density. It's no longer in production. It has nothing in common with the 8 gigabit D die, which is a much very relatively new memory chip for Samsung. I think it's actually their newest revision for 8 gigabit. That's at least like publicly available. They might have something internally that they're still working on. This clock's really high. The timings kind of suck. It doesn't really scale that much with voltage. So this is a very, very different, like, the behavior of this memory chip right here is completely different from something like the old D die. So if you're going to, discuss memory chips, you have to include the capacities, especially if you're going to refer to everything as letter die. Now, I like to refer to Micron specifically, like Micron memory chips, which would be the two crucial sticks here. I like to refer to those as revisions because, well, Micron's own data sheets call their memory chips revisions. Okay, now that's not to say you can't call them E die and Micron B die and this, but it's just like you're making it like, basically if you say E die, okay, because I think Samsung actually plans to do there might be an 8 gigabit E die from Samsung, which I've heard, at least I've heard something like that somewhere. I'm not sure how true it is, but the moment Samsung puts out an 8 gigabit E die, you're just going to be like, okay, so now if you say E die memory, it means Micron to some people, it means 4 gigabit Samsung to other people, and it means 8 gigabit Samsung to yet another group of people. So at that point, it's just like, great, now you need to not just specify the bloody density, Now you need to specify the actual manufacturer, because nobody's going to have any idea what you're talking about when you say lead or die. Oh, did I mention Nanya uses die designations as well? So that's going to be really fun. If Nanya memory starts getting relatively common, it's going to be like, oh yeah, I have a die or whatever. It's just like, the hell is that? I'm really glad that people don't refer to that at least for SK Hynix, people do actually refer to them as like CJR, AFR, MFR, instead of, which is literally, it's like just the last 3 letters of the part number. Which by that logic, we could refer to Samsung memory chips as 5WB, 5WC, 5WD, 5WE, but you'd still have to specify densities, which you also have to do for SK Hynix, because SK Hynix has a 4 gigabit and an 8 gigabit AFR and MFR, which is just like, that's great, guys. That's really great. 4 gigabit AFR and MFR are like completely different in behavior from any of the 8 gigabit chips, but hey, don't let them, that won't stop them from using the same naming schemes. Now, at this point, you might be like wondering, why are there so many different like manufacturing processes for memory chips of the same size, right? Like 8 gigabit D die is the same capacity as 8 gigabit B die, which is the same capacity also as 8 gigabit C die, which is also a chip Samsung makes. And the reason for this is that the memory manufacturers, their goal is to minimize the production cost of any chip capacity. So basically, 8 gigabit B die was a relatively early, actually, I think it might have been the first 8 gig memory chip that, Samsung really started, 8 gigabit memory chip that Samsung started selling. And then they were like, well, it costs too much to make it. We can make it on a smaller nanometer manufacturing process. We can make pack more chips onto the same wafer. And suddenly, instead of costing, I don't know, $1 a chip, it can cost us 90 cents to make one chip. And that's great because, if it costs 90 cents to make the chip and we can still sell it for the old prices, well, that's 10 cents more profit for us. So the memory manufacturers are constantly putting out new memory revisions as they're able to reduce manufacturing costs. Like, that's their primary goal. As a side effect of that, they really don't care about performance. So D-die right here, which is newer than B-die, is also kind of terrible. It's really, like, timing-wise, it's very, very loose. It's great for high frequencies, and that's probably why Samsung actually, is starting to, like, why this is going full mass production at this point. It's not just sampling, because chips go through, like, a sampling process, and then eventually they hit mass production. And this is now in mass production. The main logic there is just like, this can do JEDEC 3200 megahertz, which JEDEC 3200 megahertz is at CL22 1.2 volts. Now, B-die can technically also do it. It's just not very consistent about it. So Samsung, they're just like, well, we would like to sell a lot of 3200 CL22 memory at 1.2 volts. We're going to phase out B-die at some point. They're not doing it yet, as far as I can tell. They're probably still plenty profitable to just keep running the production line the same way instead of, retooling it for a different memory chip. Yeah, so right now it's like D-die is coming in and it's just like, oh yeah, it's cheaper to make, it clocks higher at low voltages, it does terrible timings, but, Samsung sells to data centers. They really couldn't care less how good the clock speeds are, like how tight you can run the timings, because running the timings tighter than JEDEC spec is a spec violation. Nobody's going to do that on a server. Not at a large enough scale for Samsung to actually care anyway. So that's kind of the thing, is you get all of these different chip revisions, and over time, performance, like sometimes you get lucky, like B-die is kind of a massive anomaly for recent memory chips, because generally you'll have a TRCD that doesn't scale with voltage and is relatively high. You'll have a TRP that may or may not scale with voltage but is still relatively high. TRFC just gets steadily worse and worse as the manufacturing process size gets smaller. So you have all of these, just like, as the chips get bigger and bigger, they just kind of get slower and slower. And then 8 gigabit B-die is just like, this just blows everything out of the water. TRCD goes low if you shove enough voltage into it. TRP goes low if you shove, like, it just scales with voltage so well. It's amazing. The only downside is it's really, really inconsistent, which, That's why you don't want to buy Samsung's own B-die memory, because Samsung's own binning process, because again, Samsung doesn't care about overclockers like me, or I assume you might be a bit casual with your overclocking, but hey, you're still watching this channel, so at least you know how, I would assume you know at least how to enable the XMP profile at this point. Samsung doesn't care about people like you or me. And they care about data centers. So their binning process is really not that great, which is how, this stick, which is the best stick I own, manages to have the same binning designation from Samsung as this stick. So Samsung rates both of these, the memory chips on this stick and this stick from Samsung's own binning process are both rated as 2133 mega transfers per second consumer temperature grade, which is just that's the lowest bin they do. Okay, they have industrial temperature grade, which is from minus, I think, 40 up to 95 degrees. Consumer temperature range is from 0 to 85. And then, 2133 is literally the lowest DDR4 frequency that you can do. Well, actually, I think there's JEDEC 1866 as well as a spec. But nonetheless, Samsung does do a 2133 is basically the lowest bin they have. So it's just so this by Samsung's rating is a terrible stick of memory right here. But no, Patriot went through bought a bunch of chips from Samsung, sorted them again themselves, and came to the conclusion that this right here is viable for their 4400 CL19 bin. And yeah, it's some of the best memory I own at this point. Same with this Corsair stick. This also uses a 2133 bin from Samsung, but Corsair has retested it and gone no, this can actually do 3600 CL16 at 1.35 volts. And Team Group with this stick, same bin designation from Samsung, rated at 3733 CL18 1.35 volts. So basically, Samsung's binning process is trash, and you shouldn't buy Samsung memory unless you're totally happy with just getting playing you're basically playing the Silicon Lottery on hard mode, because with memory sticks, it's not, you can't just have one good memory chip. You need all 8 of them to not suck at the same time. So if you have a memory chip that's really inconsistent, right, and you have a binning policy that, say, Samsung has, and you buy Samsung OEM memory kits, what do you think the probability is that every single, all 8 of the memory chips that ended up on your green PCB OEM Samsung stick don't suck, right? Considering that Samsung doesn't care for binning for high voltage. So yeah, that's kind of the reason why you'd actually want to buy your memory from G.skill, Corsair, Team Group, all of these different memory vendors, because they actually make sure that you don't get the binning rejects. Whereas Samsung and Micron and SK Hynix, themselves is just nope, don't care. It's just it does 2666, therefore it's good enough for us. The highest bin you can buy from Samsung is 3200 CL22, and it's very hard to find. So that's the other thing. And even then, 3200 CL22 at 1.2 volts is not exactly a difficult bin to do. So then it's how good do you think those chips are actually going to be? Compared to something where, some third-party memory vendor has gone through and resorted the chips to much higher standards. So, yeah, all of the memory chips, they're made by only a couple companies, but you still don't want to buy them directly from the manufacturers because they don't freaking bin them properly at all. Now, I didn't talk, I forgot to mention Crucial. So Crucial is kind of special because Crucial actually is owned by Micron, and Micron, of course, makes DDR4 memory chips. There's one other brand like that, which is CLIV, and CLIV is more interesting because, so Crucial was a memory vendor before, Crucial made memory, and then Micron bought them. As in, they didn't make memory chips, they made memory sticks, and then Micron bought them. And, now they're basically almost exclusively Micron memory chips on all of their memory sticks, though Crucial will occasionally use Samsung memory chips if Crucial's trying to make some higher performance kits that they can't quite do with Micron memory. Now, as of recently, Micron now has memory chips that are absolutely freaking killer, so Crucial doesn't need to resort to using Samsung anymore for their higher speed bins. But it used to be that you could get 3200... Actually, no, not 32. And actually, it might have been. Yeah, it was 3200 CL16 or something that you could get Samsung E-die from Crucial. And you could get, and I think it was 3000 CL15. Also, where you could get Samsung 4 gigabit E die from Crucial. You could also get Samsung 8 gigabit B die from Crucial if you bought, I think it was 3200 CL16 8 gig, or maybe 3600 CL16 as well. And it's just like, yeah, so Crucial will occasionally use Samsung memory chips. I've never heard of Crucial using SK Hynix, but generally Crucial will try to sell Micron because they are owned by Micron, and so Crucial exists as a method for Micron to sell memory chips more efficiently. SK Hynix, on the other hand, with CLIV, basically just kind of decided that thing that Micron's doing with Crucial looks cool. We want to do that too, and they created a brand called CLIV, which exclusively sells SK Hynix memory. They're really difficult to find, though. So it's like they're a brand, they exist, but have fun trying to find the modules. Like I've not seen them in the UK as far as I can remember. So anyway, yeah, so the memory chips, subject to the Silicon Lottery, you want to, like, if you want to not be confusing people, you want to refer to them as manufacturer capacity revision, which you can just say for the revision, you just say E die, B die, whatever. Or, if you use my naming scheme, everything Samsung makes and is letter die. Micron is rev letter, so revision and letter, and then you refer to SK Hynix by the last three letters of the part number, which is like CJR, AFR, MFR, JJR, DJR. You get the idea. Or you can just go, SK Hynix, like Hynix 4 gigabit M die. If you want to make your life, if you want to make life difficult for everybody. Yeah, I've got 4 gigabit Hynix M die. That's totally gonna fly. You're like, well, yeah. Anyway, so that's the memory chips. They're produced by a couple manufacturers. You really want them actually for a lot of them, you want them binned by somebody like Team Group or G.skill or Corsair, or Guile. Right. Though some memory chips are more consistent than others. So like I really want to test more Samsung D-Die, for example, because this stick is it's not great in terms of timings, but it's impressive in terms of frequency. So it's just and I'm not sure if it's consistent, right? Like this is a 2666 megahertz rated memory stick that I've had all the way up to 5 gigahertz with relative ease. Okay, I did not put that much time into it and it did 5 gigahertz, and it was just like, wait, what? I've not been able to do 5 gigahertz for as long as I've had for ages. This is the first time I did 5 gigahertz, and it's with a green PCB OEM Samsung stick. So now I'm like, well, maybe these are relatively consistent, because that alone, just having a manufacturing process where the chips aren't all over the place in terms of performance, that's a good enough reason for Samsung to go and change manufacturing processes. So anyway, yeah, that's the memory chips, and they dictate the overclocking behavior of your memory stick, because the timings you can hit, the frequencies you can hit, and the voltages, the voltage behavior is entirely dependent on the memory chips. However, the Silicon Lottery plays a huge role where it's this doesn't scale with voltage, it times like it's AFR, and just generally it's terrible in every way, and this is just generally a terrible stick of memory. Whereas this, on the other hand, the Silicon Lottery basically means that it's yeah, this is B-die, but this is terrible B-die, and this can, terrible B-die can be significantly worse than other memory chips that are good. So, a good Rev E is going to blow a terrible B-die away, and a good CJR is just going to is going to beat both of those as well, actually, because CJR does slightly tighter timings than Rev E does. At least, it depends on what kind of frequencies you're looking at and how good the Rev E you're talking about is, because I have seen some Rev E kits where the TRFC is it's not B-die levels of TRFC, but it's not as bad as some of my a lot of my sticks are, where it's just whoa, whoa, that's terrible. Anyway, where was I going with this? So the binning is also a very important factor with the memory chips, and that's part of the reason why I don't like 3200 CL16. Okay, 3200 CL16 as an XMP bin at 1.35 volts means basically nothing, because you get every chip under the sun can do it. Okay, that's not entirely true. There are definitely chips out there that won't do 3200 CL16, but those are we don't talk about those. Okay, we just don't talk about those. But 3200 CL16 is kind of a it's pretty bad because with a lot of manufacturers, it's just kind of everything. So you'll get, you can get MFR like in an 8 GB, okay, 8 GB 3200 CL16 memory stick. What can you get? You can get 4 GB D die from Samsung. You can get 4 GB E die from Samsung. Now, you're not actually going to get that if you're buying it these days because it doesn't make sense to make an 8 GB stick with 4 GB chips anymore. But at some point in time, that was a more cost effective, like the most cost effective way of making 8 GB sticks. And back then, you'd be getting, you know, like 4 GB memory chips from Samsung and Micron. And actually, I don't think Micron made a single 4. More recently, I think there is a Micron chip that can do 3200 CL16, but back in the day, there wasn't. So you couldn't get like a Micron 3200 CL16 4 GB memory stick, or 8 GB double-sided stick. But yeah, so you could get, you know, dual rank dual rank 4 GB E die, dual rank 4 GB D die. You could then get, you know, terrible B die. 8 GB terrible B die will end up in 3200 CL16. C die 8 GB will end up in 3200 CL16. AFR 8 GB, MFR 8 GB. I think AFR 4 GB probably made it into some 3200 CL16 sticks as well. Like Micron Rev E, right? Rev E goes into 3200 CL16. Like everything goes into 3200 CL16. So I don't cover 3200 CL16 rated memory kits because it's like if I buy a 3200 CL16 memory kit and you then compare, like let's say I get a C die. Right, I get a freaking 8 GB stick of C die with like the Samsung C die memory chips. They're terrible. They're absolutely god awful. They don't scale with voltage. The timings are loose. Probably this card might be one like it still clocks okay. I can still do decent clock speeds, which is how it gets into 3200 CL16. But it's just like, hey, do you not like how D die is loose and doesn't really do tight timings? Yeah, imagine that, but worse. It's just like that's C die from what I've heard about it at least. Because I've not actually tested it myself. I don't really want to give Samsung money for a chip like that. You know, I like to keep my collection down to memory chips that are interesting or at least good, right? Which is why there's so much B die in my collection. I have 4 sticks of this, 4 sticks of that, 4 sticks of this, and then I have 2 sticks of G.skill, like G.skill with B die, and then another 2 sticks from like HyperX with B die. Oh, and this is also B die, but this is terrible, so I'm getting rid of that. So you get the idea. It's just like my collection is heavily just B die. So anyway, so 3200 CL16 is just kind of like a lottery bin where you're not only playing the silicon lottery of how good it's like there's a silicon lottery to the B die, but then it's like, and now you're also playing the memory lottery of what am I gonna get? I might get a Hynix, I might get a Samsung, I might get like you'll get anything and everything under the sun in a 3200 CL16. So then it's like if if I did a video overclocking a 3200 CL16, it's just like whatever results I get just don't apply to say 80% of the other memory kits that are 3200 CL16. Right. Also, if you get like B die in a 3200 CL16, I'm very sorry to say, but that B die is a binning reject and terrible. Like on this level, this is actually a binning. So this is a 2400 CL15 by spec memory kit, but this is a binning reject for 3000 CL16. Because it literally comes with an XMP profile built into the stick for 3000 CL16, and there is a SKU using this exact same PCB. Like Antec had two more SKUs of memory, which are 3200 CL16 and 3000 CL16 that are based on this. So this is like the very bottom of the binning rejects, whereas the 3200 CL16 is like, well, it's not good enough to do 3200 CL14, which is like proper good B die at that point, or 3600 CL16, which is good B die, or 3600 CL17 is actually kind of interesting because it used to be a B die bin, and then more recently every manufacturer under the sun took their 3600 CL17 bin, loosened out the primaries to 17, 19, 19, and now it's like a bunch of CJR. Similarly, 3600 CL16 is very dependent on if it's 16, 18, 18 or 16, 19, 19. If it's 16, 18, 18, basically has to be B die. If it's 16, 19, 19, unless you're looking at Crucial, because Crucial has like Uber bin Rev Rev E from Micron. So, you know, Crucial can bin 3600 at like TRCD 18 out of Rev E. Most other manufacturers don't bother with that because it's too difficult. So they reserve that for BDI and they sell all of the Rev E under 3600, 16, 19, 19. So basically, based on the XMP spec, you can kind of tell what kind of memory chips you can get, and 3200 CL16 about is just like the worst for that because you can't tell. It's everything. Whereas something like 3600, you know, 16, 19, 19 has to be Rev E or CJR or DJR. It can't really be anything else because there's not that many. Oh, and it could be some, you know, weaker B-die, but it's just like if the B-die can do 3600, 16, 19, it can probably do 16, 18. And at that point, it's just like, why are you selling it as 16, 19, right? Just charge more for it and sell it as 16, 18. So yeah, so from the XMP spec, you can kind of tell what kind of memory chips you could get. And once you get into like 3000 CL16, 3200 CL16, you know, and lower speeds and worse specs, you just start getting into memory kits where it's like, well, it's whatever showed up on the factory floor that day because that is not a real bin. That's just kind of like something you slap on there to add, like, well, to be fair, you might at least get validation that that'll work. Like you can buy the kit and it'll run 3200 CL16 and it'll be stable. Whereas if you bought something like a 2400 CL16, you might get memory chips that won't do 3200 CL16, and you'll still have the whole lottery part of it where it's just like, who knows what you're gonna get? It might be even like it could be even worse. But yeah, like 3200 CL16 is just like if you actually want to, you know, if you're interested in doing proper memory overclocking, I would just kind of avoid it because it's everything, and it makes it very unreliable to know what you're going to be getting. So yeah, unless you're looking at Crucial, because again, Crucial's owned by Micron, so Crucial will primarily use Micron memory chips, assuming that the Micron memory chips available are capable of doing the specs they want. And right now, you know, Micron is putting out Rev E that, you know, just any speed that Crucial wants, Micron can do. It's just they have to just kind of run some of the timings a bit looser, primarily the TRCD, because Rev E just doesn't do low TRCD, which is like the main identifying feature. Like, let's say you want B-die because you're like me, and it's just like, I like spending way more on memory than is absolutely necessary. Because to be honest, like, you know, it's like, yeah, B-die is the fastest memory, and there's nothing that can compare with it. At the same time, it is worth noting that even like a 5% performance difference between one memory chip, like one set of memory and another set of memory, will not translate into a 5% performance gain in very many workloads. There are very few workloads that are that memory bound, that going from, you know, 32, like going from 200, like going from 600 TRFC down to 300 TRFC, like not going to notice that much of a difference. And you're also not going to know, like, it's not just like 600 to 300 TRFC. You'll also have like TRCD will be 16 instead of 18. And so you'll have like 2 or 3 ticks of TRCD, 2 or 3 ticks of TRP advantage, lower TRC. So there's multiple timings where B-die does have an advantage, but it's just like, yeah, it's not going to add up to some massive, like, like if you're just playing games, just buy Rev E, you'll be fine. Though Rev E can run into some, like, not all motherboards, because it's newer than B-die, not all motherboards are particularly well optimized for it, because the BIOS has to actually kind of, like, well, with some time, like, just some memory sticks don't play that great with a lot of motherboards. Right, so it's just like, and then on some other motherboards, they can go much higher, so the BIOS has potentially a big impact, and it's just like, yeah, and V-die is like, you know, it's been around for a while, everybody loves it, so it's well supported. And then it's just like with some of the other chips, you might end up on some boards where it's just like, this barely even posts, why doesn't it work? So yeah, that's also a consideration. Man, you know, I told myself that I'd try and make this video more beginner friendly by not having it be an hour, but I should just give up on that. At this point, we're so far off the deep end that all the beginners left in the first 5 minutes, probably. Anyway, so yeah, that's kind of the consideration. Finally, we're done with the considerations for the memory chips. The thing is just like there's too much to talk about with it. So yeah, I like B-die because it's fast, and yeah, you know, I like for benchmarking. It's just like, hey, if I can have 2% more like score in a CPU test, like that's a win. Even if it's just 1 point, it's just like that's a win. So for that reason, I really like BDI. But for most users, I'd say it's pretty overrated. Though you can these days find BDI at like Patriot has a lot of BDI at just like I can't believe this is BDI for the price. Like they're selling BDI where it's just like you're charging like half of what like everybody else would charge for an equivalent speed bin, which is just like, how are you doing that? Like, what happened? Are you like Samsung's favorite memory brand or something? Like, how are you getting these like, why are you selling these kits so cheap? Whereas, with a lot of other vendors, it's just like for the like even 3200 CL14 can be pretty expensive. And in the UK specifically, like this stick right here, this is a Patriot 4400 CL19 BDI stick. This, like, I bought this stick is from a set that I got for £110. And then more recently, I bought another set for £100. Like, the next cheapest thing is like 3200 CL14 at like £140 or 130, £140. And it's just like, that's insane. Like, I don't know how this is so cheap, but it is. So that's great. But so in that case, it's just like, and that is still like 30 quid more than like a Rev E kit that doesn't suck, right? Because you can get Rev E on like 3000 CL15 Crucial, which is what this stick right here is. This is 3000 CL15 from Crucial. You can also get, 3200 CL16 from Crucial and get Rev E, and those are pretty cheap, but like, well, depends, like, because the thing is just like, well, budget priorities, right? It's like, is your GPU nice enough for you already? Is your CPU nice enough? Do you have a nice enough motherboard? Like, the funny thing is like, I would totally sacrifice, like, well, actually, if you want, for Intel specifically, if you want great memory overclocking performance, you want an ITX motherboard, and most of those cost less than $200. So if you want to go and buy yourself some expensive memory, like, and then a matching motherboard for it, it's actually more cost effective than buying like a $300 ATX board and then Rev E. Like, you're gonna have more CPU performance for like less cost overall because your motherboard's gonna be so much cheaper, which is insane. Though it is worth noting the ITX boards do have thermal like concerns, so you do need to do something about that. But the memory overclocking performance, like, you can't find an ATX board that just keeps up with an ITX. It's just not doable. Well, no, there are some exceptions, like the Maximus 11 Gene from Asus, the Apex when they were still making it, the Z390 Dark from EVGA, but that thing's $500. So at that point, you've just kind of thrown any cost concerns out the window. So then it's just like, yeah, buy BDI, because like I assume you have a 2080 Ti at that point too. So yeah, so that's the memory chips. Let's talk about the PCBs. So the other value add that you get with like Patriot, Team Group, Corsair, G.skill, which I don't have on the desk, Guile, is that they don't use the absolute cheapest possible PCB design. So this right here is, a green, like the fact that the PCB is green, that's not actually the main concern. Like, this could be green and it could still be a good PCB. No, but this right here is what is known as a A2 layout. And so there's a couple of sort of like what you could consider reference PCB layouts for DDR4. This is an A2 layout. And so the A2 layout basically puts the memory chips into two groups like this and brings them closer down to the gold fingers, right? So you can notice that, well, just look at this, which this is an A0 and this is an A2. And you can clearly see that the memory chips on this stick are further away from the actual gold fingers than on this stick. And the design differences is like the A0 layout was actually the first layout that you got for DDR4. It was designed for 2133 megahertz as the operating frequency, whereas A2 is basically the most recent PCB design or PCB layout, and that is designed for at least 2666. So this is designed for 2666 JEDEC. This is designed for 2133 by JEDEC spec now. This is not the lowest cost version of an A0. As you can see, we have some SMD components on the back, and we have some extra capacitors on the front. And of course, it's white, so that costs extra. Then there's the dragon thing going on, which probably doesn't cost much in terms of manufacturing, but does in terms of like that's design cost on the PCB right there, right? Somebody had to design the, what even is that? Because like that, well, the solder mask, they had to design that there. By comparison, this A2 stick from Samsung, there's no components on the back at all, because if you put any components on the back of the PCB, that's a second reflow process the stick has to go through. You can't run it through the oven once anymore. You have to run it through the oven twice. And, well, that costs extra money, so nope, you're not putting any extra components on the back. Because basically the priority is just to minimize the manufacturing cost of the stick. So adding the extra components on the back can be done to basically optimize for better signal integrity, which can translate into better overclocking. Another thing that you'll frequently see is the higher end memory sticks will use more PCB layers. So I think this is a 10 layer, but the reference designs are all 8 layers. So this is an 8-layer PCB right here. This is an 8-layer, but this I know for a fact is a 10. That's a 10. This is a 10. Right, then Corsair, like this is technically a style, like this is an A2 style layout, this is also an A2 style layout. Of course, this is like the cheapest way to do an A2. This is also an A2 right here. This is like an A2 style layout. And the thing is, they're actually, like, you can see Corsair's just gone to absolutely to town on this, where they have the little, like, this gold strip right here is for better heat dissipation. They have the RGB circuitry on top of that, of course. There's a different capacitor configuration. You have components absolutely bloody everywhere, including on the back, of course. They've made the PCB taller so that this brace can actually screw into the PCB, which I think is kind of neat. That's a cool way of attaching heat sinks to memory sticks. Unfortunately, they still like use thermal tape for the actual memory chips, where it's just like, why can't you just use the screws to hold the plate on? That would make it easier to disassemble later. But anyway, so that's kind of what's going on with, so the PCBs get customized and they add extra PCB layers, add extra SMD components, tweak the layout a little bit. And the goal of all of these adjustments, at least with the overclocking memory kits, is, well, a lot of kits, the adjustments are just like, well, we want to cram RGB on there. And it's just like, okay, sure, you need to put the RGB circuitry somewhere. So you'll see adjustments made for that. But then, of course, you also have the adjustments just done for, like, we want more clock speed, right? Where you get the extra layers, and that's just to try improve the signal integrity, and that basically translates into memory kits where it's just like they can clock higher, they can do tighter timings, they require less voltage for the same overclocks. So that's kind of the thing. At the same time, some of the more extreme adjustments to the layouts can cause compatibility issues with motherboards. And in fact, just generally, the layout itself can cause issues with motherboards because, so the Maximus 11 Gene from Asus is a motherboard I initially really didn't like very much, because basically my entire DDR4 collection when I first got the board was just A2 memory, as in this style of layout. So I had these team group sticks, and actually that was all I really had. It's just a bunch of the team group sticks. And they're all A2. And the Gene's BIOS at the time was optimized almost exclusively for A0. And it was just like, so what you're so the end result of that is, because there are basically impedance differences and also timing differences from the DIMMs, like the chips are physically further away from the memory controller than on an A0 than they are on an A2. So the end result of that is just like there's a little bit of a timing difference between when a signal from an A0 DIMM arrives to when a signal from an A2 arrives. And that means if the motherboard's BIOS isn't configured to deal with that, the overclocking can get very bad very quickly if you use a PCB where it's just like the timings are wrong. And by that, I don't mean the primary timings or the secondary, tertiary. I mean the memory controller timings, like, and the memory controller configuration in general, where it's just like, the end result is like you end up with issues like, a memory stick that can easily do, say, 3800 CL12 on a bunch of my other motherboards just can't do anything lower than like 3800 CL16, because the BIOS is just that out of whack with the memory layout. So that's one of the concerns with the layouts. And then even within like the A2s, so more recently the Gene got some BIOS updates that actually fix the A2 compatibility, and it's been great. Like, it's amazing now. But the issue is like even within the A2 sort of style, you can have a lot of variance, and that's the RGB dominators compared to basically all the other A2 I have. These, I don't know what Corsair did, but the Gene will not run 1T command rate on these at high frequencies. It's just absolutely impossible. Whereas with a lot of the other sticks, like this stick right here can do 4174 megahertz. It's CL12 with 1T command rate. This, on the other hand, 4133, CL13, TCWL13, because for whatever reason, cast write latency being lower than 13 causes the board to freak out, and command rate of 2. So even though this stick, if I run it on an X299 board, will do 4000 CL12 just fine. Also, the Z390 Dark doesn't like this PCB either. So it's very strange, because actually Corsair like QVLs this kit for Z390, and Z3, like Z300 series is their official QVL, or at least what they recommend running them on. They don't really do QVLs at Corsair, but the funny thing is like, my best experience with this kit is on X299. On the Z300 series boards, it's been like, yeah, at daily settings, it's just fine. But when I really want to push it, the memory controller configurations just can't deal with it on most of the boards. And, you know, I get stuck at things like, oh, we can't go past 4100 megahertz. I don't know why. The stick does 4000 plus, does like 4400 on a bunch of other boards, but not on my Z300 series ones. So that's kind of the other thing that the PCB affects is just like, you know, yeah, so like, and then you have the PCBs like the Patriot one here where you have all of these extra capacitors, and I think this one actually doesn't depart, like this one doesn't cause any issues that I've run into. When I first noticed all the extra capacitors, I was like, oh my god, this is going to be another Dominator RGB PCB where it's just so far off of the standard A2 that nothing works with it. And no, it seems like they just added some extra capacitors and didn't touch anything. At least I've not run into any issues with the sticks, which is really nice. Whereas this is just like, yeah, this is going off the deep end. And the fact that there's RGB circuitry, that's not a concern, because there is A2, the A2 layout is actually really popular, well, basically exclusive to, like, it's always an 8, like, if you get an RGB stick, it's always going to be A2. And the reasoning for it is, you see this great big hole in the center of an A2 memory stick? It's very convenient to just kind of jam your RGB circuitry in there. So that's why A2 is really, like, if you want, like, for G.skill for a while, when, you know, G.skill first started introducing A2, they initially started using the A2 layout only on the RGB kits. And if you wanted A0, you would just buy it on RGB G.skill and you wouldn't get A2. But if you bought an RGB, you always had A2, because it's just like, well, the circuitry just kind of fits, whereas on A0, it doesn't. But yeah, more recently, G.skill has also just transitioned everything to A2 because either they, you know, managed to iron out any compatibility issues, or it's just like the motherboards now support A2 properly, and G.skill doesn't see a reason to keep putting out A0. So yeah, the different PCBs affect compatibility. The big differences are also in terms of the frequencies that you can run. So like A0 is just really not good at very, very high clock speeds. It's initially designed for 2133 megahertz, and you can't, like, A0 going past 4600 megahertz is very difficult to impossible. That, like, I do actually have a G.skill kit of 4600 CL19 that's on an A0 PCB, but that is, like, that is some rather, like, special memory right there. Just because it's like A0 at that higher frequency, like, that is not normal for the PCB. Whereas with A2, well, that's what you see all the memory frequency world records being smashed on, is just A2 PCB layouts, because the PCB is just like by spec, like the main reason it was created was just like it goes faster. And so then it's just like, well, if you tune it even more for speed, then you get the whole, you know, 5 gigahertz, 6 gig. Well, actually, at this point, DDR4 is all the way up at 6 gigahertz for the world record. And it's just like, yeah, that's done with the A2 layout, not A0, because A0 doesn't do that. Then we also have this right here, which this is a A1 layout. You're never really going to, well, Crucial used it on some sticks, but you're not going to frequently see this because A1 is you can see this right here, this missing chip. That's for ECC. This PCB is pretty popular. I'd assume it's relatively popular with OEMs because the whole idea here is, well, you can use one PCB layout to make both ECC memory and non-ECC memory without having to buy two different PCBs. It is a little bit higher cost in terms of manufacturing than an A2 though, because you do have extra SMDs on the back. In terms of frequencies, I had this, I think, all the way up at 4700. So this really, like, it doesn't seem to have as bad a frequency wall as, like, A0 has. But, yeah, it's, like, it's not prior, like, A2 is just a step further towards frequency, because this by JDEC spec is 2400. And the chips are, you know, slightly different layout from what you see on A2. So, yeah, that's an A1. And then I guess I wanted to talk a bit about this. So this is a Crucial A0 where it's like a low-cost A0 because you can see there's no SMDs on the back. I'd assume it's an 8-layer PCB at that point. Yeah, you know, no components on the back. It just kind of tells you, like, if there's no components on the back, that's when you know, like, they're definitely trying to cut costs because that is the most obvious indicator that, hey, yeah, they're saving on the PCB. So yeah, this is like a low-cost implementation of A0. And there's also some capacitor configuration differences between this stick and this stick, but they're not that obvious on camera. But basically, you can see that we have some extra capacitors right on the top edge of the chips, which are missing on this stick. You can see that there's just one cap for every chip instead of a whole row of extra caps. So yeah, the PCBs... basically the simple way to think about both of these things is the memory chips, they dictate the overclocking behavior. Like, you know, B-die, like no amount of PCB tuning is going to make 4 gigabit E-die clock and time like 8 gigabit B-die from Samsung. It's just not going to happen. Oh, and I also forgot to mention that there's also like the, you know, dual rank sticks with the double-sided PCBs. And these are a B, like the style of layout for these is B. It's just like, so the A1 actually is shared also, if you use it as ECC, I think it's called D1. If you use it as non-ECC, it's supposed to be called A1. And similarly for dual rank memory sticks, you have a bunch of PCB revisions, which basically go B0, B1, B2, B3. I think this is a B3 right here because of the larger memory chip. So B2 is actually designed for the like standard size, like, well, the smaller memory chips that we see on all of the B-die memory sticks, as well as the E-die and this one over here, this one here. This one, obviously, that's a larger memory chip, so I don't know what layout that would be for. But yeah, this is a B3 because of the bigger memory chips. And these are Samsung M-die 16 gigabit, which this is a funny chip because you can't even find it on Samsung's own website. They acknowledge that, you know, they sell sticks with it, but if you want to look up the memory chip itself, yeah, I can't find it. But if you look in the spec sheet for these memory sticks, it's just like, yeah, it uses M-die. And then it's like, so what is M-die, Samsung? And they're like, oh, we don't talk about that. It just kind of exists. Anyway, so that's a 32 gig stick. And it's just here to show you like it's just in the pile here to show a different style of layout. So yeah, that's kind of it. So basically the PCBs can skew the behavior of the memory chip, right? Like, you're not going to, like, an A0 based B-die memory stick is just never going to clock that high as an A2 B-die memory stick, or you know, if they made a A0 Rev E, which they won't because A0 is now so old that I'll be very surprised if anybody uses it for anything anymore. You know, you'd have a Rev E stick that really sucks at high memory frequencies, which is just like, I don't know why you'd want to do that, because that's like the only good feature of Rev E. So it can clock high. Oh, and I guess that it's cheap. That's a redeeming feature as well. So yeah, it's just like the PCB, you know, can alter the behavior, the compatibility a bit, but it won't fundamentally change that, like, B-die is B-die, and it also won't fundamentally change that trash B-die is trash B-die. Which is why this actually is not like like you'd think this is on like the super low cost PCB, but no, this is actually got SMDs on the back, and as far as I can tell, this is the same PCB that Team Group uses on this stick, which this is definitely the same PCB as that stick. And so it's just like, but this is trash because the chips are trash. So the chips is just like, you need good chips, and then, you know, like, good chips on a bad PCB is better than bad chips on a good PCB. Because a good PCB won't save a bad memory chip, because it's still going to be bad, right? Like, if the chip just doesn't do low TRCD, well, you can tweak the PCB all you want, it's still not going to go any lower on the TRCD. Whereas on the other hand, if you have a bad PCB, yeah, the clock speeds are going to be worse, and maybe the TRCD, instead of doing 16, it'll need 17, because, you know, the PCB just kind of makes it harder for the memory controller to run the sticks. But you're not going to see like, oh, and you might get some weird timing, like cast write latency might be way higher than it should be, but all of your other stuff, like TRFC is not going to be affected by that. TRCD and TRP generally don't really care too much about PCBs either. Command rate is very, very dependent on the PCB. Well, I'd put a command rate and cast write latency as the most affected by PCB design. Because, like, those are the two timings where it's just like, if something is wrong somewhere, those are the two that end up being way higher than you'd expect. Because they can also go really low if you have a good, like, a really optimal configuration. But the issue is, like, the PCB like, there's an interaction between the PCB and the motherboard's BIOS, so it's just like, you know, like, you can't really say, like, oh, this A2 PCB is just universally terrible. It's just like, it's terrible on X motherboard. Or X set of motherboards. And maybe only under, like, maybe only when you're really, really pushing for the limits. So, yeah, that's everything I wanted to say in this video. Is just like, memory chips, you know, very important. You want good ones, you don't want bad ones, which is why we don't buy 3200 CL16, because you might get good ones, you might get terrible ones. So don't buy it, because it's just going to be all over the place. And then the PCB is just kind of like the thing is, you don't even get that much choice these days. Like, I'm not aware of many vendors selling A0 anymore. I think Team Group still has an A0 based SKU, which is, I think, 4133 CL, like 18 timings. But like everybody else is just like A2, just A2 all day, every day. Because it's newer, it clocks higher, the compatibility on most newly released motherboards will generally have good compatibility with A2, whereas actually I've heard of some cases where newer motherboards will not like A0. So it's just like, yeah, those optimizations that were done for A0 when A0 was relevant, yeah, we just kind of forgot to include them in the BIOS, and it's just like, oh, well, now that doesn't work very well anymore. So, yeah, that's it. That's it for the video. So thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. And if you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I have a Patreon, which allows me to buy more, well, primarily green PCB Samsung sticks, because for a lot of the other memory, I can try get samples these days. Whereas, like, you can't get samples from Samsung. Like, maybe if I asked for a TV, I'd have a chance, but not memory sticks. Or monitors. Yeah, TVs, monitors, maybe. Memory sticks, hell no. But, anyway, yeah, so, you know, if you'd like to support me through Patreon, there's a link to that down in the description below. There's also the AHOC Teespring store, where you can pick up posters, shirts, stickers, what else? I think there's a hoodie on there. Socks. There's socks on there. There's definitely socks. I have a pair of those. They're a little bit too small for me, unfortunately, which is sad, because I think they're a pretty cool sock design, but yeah. Right, which, like, some people might be like, wait, so they're generally really small socks. No, like, my feet are really big. So, there, because I'm really tall. So, that's why they're... So, I'm actually impressed that I fit into the... Like, I managed to get them on at all, but it wasn't it wasn't great. Anyway, so, yeah, there's the Teespring store. You can, you know, support me by buying stuff from there. And there's links to both that and the Patreon in the description. That's it for the video. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.